Depression, and the following page after it that has the roadmap, A Journey Through Your Life During the Great Depression. So we're going to use those. I will also make these available through Google Docs so that you can access it and fill these in electronically if you don't have access to your U.S. Studies history packet. All right, so this is a little bit of notes and a simulation game kind of interwoven throughout, so you'll be kind of going back and forth between those two pages. Congratulations! It's 1927 in your love and life. In the past year, you got married and bought a new house. You have, if we were doing this in class together, I would be giving you some time to match up your cards, and you would find your spouse and fill out your marriage certificate. Okay. You want to make sure your family has the best things in life and a future of prosperity. You feel so confident in America's financial security, you decide to invest a huge portion of your savings in the stock market to start your new family off in the right direction. As the Roaring Twenties was coming to an end, the election of 1928 brought overwhelming victory for Herbert Hoover. Herbert Hoover campaigned on the prosperity and optimism that Americans had been feeling under the previous Republican presidents, Warren G. Harding and Calvin Coolidge. So you can see with the map of the United States and the election results from the 1928 campaign, all of the red states were the states that gave their electoral college votes to Herbert Hoover, and the blue states gave their state's electoral college votes to the Democrat that was running against him. However, there were some serious troubles brewing behind the scenes concerning our nation's economy. That would mean trouble during Herbert Hoover's presidency. The risky economic practices were about to catch up with the country. Herbert Hoover ran against Democrat Alfred E. Smith in the 1928 election. Herbert Hoover emphasized in his campaign the years of prosperity under the Republican administrations, and Hoover won an overwhelming majority victory. During World War I, Americans had been encouraged to borrow money from banks to expand their farms and grow more food to help the Allied countries. Banks in the United States had also been loaning foreign countries money to rebuild after World War I. American industries were mass-producing goods with the idea of selling our exports to other countries. Americans were buying consumer goods and cars and homes on credit so that we could enjoy the luxuries of higher standards of living. Many Americans were also using their money to invest in the stock market. Buy, 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 experts advise. So on the game, the page with the roadmap, you need to choose one of the stocks that you're going to invest your life savings into. Write the number that's associated with the stock that you choose on your travel log. Okay, so number 1 is Teltone Company, 2 Radio Corporation, 3 Mammoth Oil, 4 Gotham Bank, 5 Ford Motors, and 6 Kansas Pacific Railroad. Pause the video, write your number down, and then push play again to discover what happens to your stocks. Also, congratulations to you and your spouse. You have welcomed a new baby into your family. Okay, if we were doing this in class, one of you would come up and get a baby from our hospital box. In the early 1920s, industries were growing and people were investing in the stock market. When a company is doing well, shareholders of stock share in the profits. 2 risky trends, though, were going on for investing that became really common in the 1920s. Many Americans, number 1, are buying stocks hoping to just turn around and sell them quickly for a fast profit. The stock market is meant to be a long-term, patient waiting game, not a get-rich-quick scheme. The other risky trend that Americans were practicing was something we talked about earlier called buying on the margin. Americans were getting loans from banks to purchase stock. When stock prices fell, the people that lost money didn't have that money to then repay their bank loans. In September of 1929, investors celebrated because stock price had reached a record high, but the bubble was about to burst. On Thursday of October 24th, stockbrokers were trying to sell tens of thousands of shares, but nobody was buying. When there's way more stock available to buy and not enough people who have a demand for that stock, then you have what happens in the market, in any other market either, not just the stock market, but when you have a lot of something available, but not enough people demanding to buy that, it kind of just sits there and we slash prices to try to get rid of it. And that's what happened to stocks. Stock prices started to fall. Investors panicked as they saw the value of their stocks falling lower and lower. Stockbrokers were demanding payments from the investors who had bought stocks on the margin using bank loans. People were frantically trying to sell their shares. And by Tuesday, October 29th, 1929, the stock market had collapsed. This day became known as Black Tuesday. I'm going to make sure that I have my highlighter. I want us to remember Black Tuesday. Oh, man. I don't know why. I think maybe all right. Black Tuesday. All right. So, people irresponsibly invested in stocks and lost money when it crashed. We call that Black Tuesday. In our notes, Black Tuesday, the nickname for October 29th, 1929, when stock market crashed and marked the beginning of the Great Depression. I'm going to highlight nickname, stock market crash, start of the Great Depression for what we need to highlight. The stock market crash signaled the beginning of the Great Depression. The Great Depression is generally defined as a period from 1929 to 1940 in which the economy plummeted and unemployment skyrocketed. So on our travelogue, here's what's going to happen to your stock. If you chose number 1, Teltone, this company declined in value by 50%. You lost half of your life savings. Please write down what it says in red on the worksheet where it says record your experience. If you chose number 2, Radio Corporation, you got lucky. This stock remained the same, so you pull your money out and you were able to take your money back and put it in the bank for safekeeping. You broke even. Number 3, Mammoth Oil. This stock is worthless. You bought it on the margin, so now you also owe the bank money. Gotham Bank, their stock declined in value by 90%. You just lost 90% of your life savings. Ford Motors, the stock declined in value by 50%. You lost half of your life savings. And Kansas and Pacific Railroads, the stock declined in value by 90%. You lost 90% of your savings. Not only were many Americans using bank loans to buy stock, even more Americans were now buying consumer goods like homes and cars on credit. Banks were loaning people money with the understanding that they would make a profit from the interest they charged. Banks had also loaned foreign countries money after World War I. When the stock market bottomed out, people began to panic and ran to get their money out of the banks. Even healthy banks suffered as depositors panicked and withdrew their money. Some banks even ran out of money. Banks loaned people and nations money which they could not later repay. Go ahead and write that in our notes. These are the reasons, the causes of the Great Depression. As a result of the stock market crash, it appears many people are not able to repay their loans to the bank. The banks may run out of money if this continues. Reports like this over the radio and in newspapers caused people to panic, and people who had their money saved in banks began to get really afraid, and they ran to the banks to try to get whatever money they could out of their savings accounts. Okay. That caused bank runs like the one that you see here. People lined up around the block to try to get money out of their banks. Okay, so you need to choose one of the numbers and write it down on your travelogue and then pause so that you can get that written down. All right, choose 1, 2, 3, or 4. Okay. Here's what happens. This is what you need to record. If you chose number 1, you push your way to the front, but the teller's only able to give you $50. If you chose number 2, the mob of people was too overwhelming. The bank ran out of money before you could withdraw anything. If you chose number 3, you arrive at the bank first thing in the morning, but most of the money was withdrawn yesterday, so the most they can give you is $65. And if you chose number 4, the mob of people was too overwhelming. The bank ran out of money before you could withdraw anything. By the late 1920s, spending declined and people were buying less. Businesses had been mass-producing consumer goods, and they're now sitting around waiting to be sold. Prices dropped. Companies then began laying off employees. When Americans began losing jobs, people started to then watch their spending even more, and this cycle continued. With fewer people buying goods, prices continued to fall. With lower prices and not as much being bought, businesses struggled. They had to either lay off people or reduce wages, and more people were either making less money or losing their jobs completely. People were not buying enough goods, and businesses were struggling to stay open. That's called underconsumption. We are not consuming enough goods. Oh, but at least you still have your job, except maybe you don't. Sorry, temporarily closed. Okay, here we have a example of the cyclical effect of job loss and how that impacted the economy. So if you are looking at the automobile industry, if people are buying fewer cars, then that means we don't need as many of the things that go into making cars. The textiles and fabric for cars, seats, the oil and gasoline that goes into the cars to keep them running, the steel that goes into making the frames for the cars, the rubber for the tires. All of those things are other industries that are now going to be impacted when the automobile industry is struggling. Now, all of the companies that run these industries, they're struggling and they have to slow down their industry. If they're slowing down production of their good, that means that they're either going to reduce the number of workers they have by firing people and laying people off, and that means unemployment is going to increase. Or some companies tried to keep on as many workers as they could, but they had to lower wages because they couldn't afford to pay everybody the same wages. So that means people can still keep their jobs, but they're making about half as much, perhaps, or even less. Okay? Now, with people either making lower wages or completely unemployed, they're going to go into savings mode, which means they're not buying things like cars. Okay, those are considered luxury items, and if we can't afford them, we're not buying them, which also then just keeps that cycle going and going and going. Okay, so it's kind of this downward momentum. Low sales means job layoffs or less income, and with less income and people unemployed, we have fewer people making purchases. With lower sales, it means more layoffs. It's just this cycle, this trend that was over and over again. So, activities that you're going to maybe do in order to make more money when you're laid off, go ahead and find this spot on the road map activity page. Choose a number 1 through 6. You're going to choose one of these numbers and write down your number on the travel log. Okay? If you chose number 1, this is how you're going to try to make some extra cash. You are going to all cram into one of their house's bedrooms, and you're going to take in renters. If you chose number 2, you're going to put your child up for adoption. If you chose number 3, you're going to make clothing out of flour sacks. You can see that the companies that made flour would put them in colorful flour sacks because they knew that families were using those kind of flour sacks to actually make clothes. It was actually really kind of them, so that their skirts didn't have the flour logo on it like that lady. Okay? If you chose number 4, the way that you're going to try to make money is to sell off your furniture from your house. Okay, if you chose number 5, you're going to beg on the corner. And if you chose number 6, you're going to try and sell apples to make some extra money. These are all ways that people really did try to bring in more money for their families during the Great Depression. Okay, so record the new